G'day guys, this is Harry from Airborne. You're watching, listening, streaming Radio Bob. No, so I was with my previous band. I toured Germany and Europe a couple of times over the previous two winters in 2015 and 16. So whilst it's not my first time in Germany, it's definitely my first time in Germany experiencing this, which is a sold out tour from start to finish of German shows in really nice big rooms with lots of room on stage, and a couple of thousand crazy Germans every single night. So it's been a really cool experience. I think this is our sixth show in Germany for the tour, and they've all been crazy. So it's awesome. Yeah, definitely. I have a really good memory of German audiences because with the band, my third and fourth shows with the band were at Rock and Park and Rock and Ring, which really big audiences. So that was kind of like a trial by fire, and I felt like I was kind of jumping in the deep end a little bit because we came straight over to Europe, didn't do any warm-up shows or anything like that back in Australia. We just rehearsed our asses off and made sure everything was as tight as we could possibly make it before getting on the road. And Rock and Park and Rock and Ring, those huge 70 or 80,000 people audiences, was definitely a new experience for me. But that was something that, for that reason, because they were some of my first shows with the band, I'll always remember those shows. They were amazing, and it's been really cool to see the German audiences at the headline shows, because obviously at the festivals there's the core group of Airborne fans up the front, but then there's a lot of people who might be hearing the band or seeing the band for the first time, and festival shows are just as much about connecting with new people as they are rocking with your old mates and things like that. So that was a really cool experience at the festivals, and then at the headline shows, just seeing Airborne fans singing every single word from the start of the show till the end of the show, singing songs before we start, singing songs after we start. It's been really cool, and I did mention before about their heavy schedule of having 12 shows in 14 days, and we wake up a little bit tired, but the energy that the crowd brings to the room makes our job a hell of a lot easier, because we essentially just harness the energy and share it around, and it kind of just becomes one big interactive show rather than just a case of the band performing for the audience. It definitely becomes a bit of like a everyone's involved situation. Yeah, I don't think it's a burden at all. I guess the way we see it is that, or the way that I see it at the very least, is that it's distinctly an Australian type of rock and roll, and AC/DC have sold 200 million albums or something outrageous like that. They're definitely the most well-known, most visible, most accessible version of Australian rock and roll that everyone from every corner of the planet knows AC/DC. So I guess in a lot of ways it's something that the guys in the band tend to just take as a bit of a compliment, because it's something the band wants to do Australian rock and roll and do Australian rock and roll well, and the fact that that people are happy to and willing to, and noticing that there's a bond between Airborne and AC/DC is kind of, if nothing else, a sign that the band's achieving what it set out to in a lot of ways. And Yeah, I guess like the history of Australian rock goes back beyond AC/DC to Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, and you know, late 70s, early 80s to Rose Tattoo and the Angels and things like that. And the really cool thing is that that I've noticed in Europe especially is that a lot of European rock and roll fans treat Australian rock and roll as its own genre of music. And so it seems as though to a lot of European rock and roll fans, it's like, you know, there's hard rock and heavy metal and blues rock and Australian rock and things like that. So it's been cool to talk to people who are on the other side of the planet, and they're having conversations with you about the most obscure Australian music you can think of. But it's cool to see people on the other side of the world so passionate about Australian music as its own genre, digging so deep into the history of it, finding new bands, finding old bands, and really, really obsessing over it. So, yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, I guess that's how we see it. It's just a long history of Australian music with certain traits and elements that kind of link a lot of Australian rock and roll bands together, and obviously AC/DC are the most prominent of the bunch. So it's a comparison that we take in our stride and take it as a compliment every time it's mentioned. Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting for me because I guess I've got the perspective of coming from outside of the band into the band and seeing the live show from both sides of the stage. Especially now that the Breaking Out Hell's been out for a year, the songs really do just seamlessly fit into the live set, and I guess in a way a lot of people are going more crazy for the newer songs, probably solely because for a lot of these people, it might actually be their first time hearing It's All for Rock and Roll live after seeing the video clip with the bomber and the tribute to Lemmy and things like that. So songs like It's All for Rock and Roll and Breaking Out of Hell, Down on You, that we are playing off the new album, have been some of the really big highlights of the live set in terms of how the audience is reacting to them. And I think what the guys were trying to achieve when they were recording the album was to create an album that was going to be full of songs that would go down and really fit into the live set, and be big anthems for a live airborne fan. So that's probably, I think we're playing 5 songs off the album tonight. So a fair chunk of the album is being played in the live set, and I think that's probably a testament to the fact that the guys did achieve their goal of setting out to create an album that would work really well with the live set. I've actually been listening to, only for the fact that I've been listening to it heaps lately. Joel and I have actually been, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, just talking about Humble Pie constantly. In Berlin a couple of weeks ago, I bought a big Humble Pie vinyl box set, and that kind of renewed our love of the band. So we've been daily in the bus. I think we've been playing I Don't Need No Doctor by Humble Pie. So I guess, you know, that's a cool rockin' song. The live version of that's awesome. And I guess if I do make it to 90, it probably may have something to do with the aid of doctors, I guess. So yeah, maybe that song relates in that way as well. Yeah, I guess similar to a lot of musicians, I was fortunate enough to have parents with really cool record collections, and I remember I remember from a really early age, like road trips in the car with my parents and Rolling Stones cassettes in the tape deck in the car, and I remember when CDs became a little more prominent in Australia in kind of like the late 90s, and I got my first few CDs. My first CD was Queen Rocks, which was a best of collection of their sort of heavier, more hard rocking songs. Excuse me. And then I had a Jimi Hendrix best of, and that was probably the main one and the first thing that made me really interested in the electric guitar. So, basically, I got really obsessed with the Jimi Hendrix best of and listening to that all the time. I loved Voodoo Child. So basically, the first thing I did was nag and beg my parents for a guitar for my 12th birthday at the time. I got a Stratocaster copy because that was like the guitar that Hendrix played, and then I saved up pocket money doing house chores and all that stuff and bought a wah pedal as soon as I possibly could so I could try and make that sound that he makes at the start of Voodoo Child. But in hindsight, I probably got a wah pedal way too soon because I could hardly play the guitar at that point. I was just making like sort of rhythmic noises and rocking my foot back and forth, trying to mimic the sound that he was making. But that was definitely a big turning point. And then I got heavily into AC/DC and started off, I guess probably doing what a lot of young musicians do who are starting out on the guitar and listening to AC/DC. The first thing you hear is Angus's playing, and I bought a couple of guitar tab books and studied them and learnt all of Angus's parts. And then as I sort of became a better guitar player and I guess a better listener of music and started hearing more in songs, I sort of came to appreciate Malcolm a lot more, and the simplicity of what he was doing, but the fact that it was the core of the band, that everything else sort of revolved around his playing, and that Angus was kind of like the icing on top of the cake. And that was when I got those tab books back out and started obsessing over and going over the Malcolm parts and trying to figure out all of his idiosyncrasies and the different and kind of unique phrasings and chord shapes and things like that don't initially knock you out as soon as you hear an AC/DC song, but when you dig a bit deeper and try and sort of get to the foundation of where they're coming from, that was definitely a key part of what they do. And they were, I guess I've got my parents to thank for having a cool record collection initially and introducing me to some cool music, and then I kind of just took it from there. And I mean, from the moment I got my first guitar, I've been insanely obsessed ever since, and even to this day, every single day, when we get into a venue, I'll go and grab one of my guitars and walk around with it for a few hours and just play, and then we're on stage for an hour and a half a night, playing our asses off as well. So still playing probably more guitar now than I ever was. I don't know what the brand was, but I probably would have been about the age of 17 or something, trying to look really cool at a party and not really enjoying it that much at all. It would have been when I was learning to drive, and I think it would have been my dad's 1982 Ford Ute, which is, do you know what a Ute is? Yeah, okay, that's good. Really old, beat up car. That was the vehicle that I was trusted to drive at the time. But yeah, that was definitely the first one. Had the old column shift and all that sort of stuff. I actually have a brother. I have a younger brother, and that was most of our childhood, basically. My younger brother's 4 years younger than me, so I had a nice run where I was much bigger than him and could push him around a little bit. But he's now about 6'2". He's a lot taller than me, and he's a lot bigger than me, and I wouldn't like to pick a fight with him now. I actually I helped out at a cemetery, digging graves for some pocket money. So this was when I was a teenager, and I would have done anything to earn a little bit of money. Like I said, to save up for guitars and all the stuff that I wanted to buy. So yeah, it sounds a hell of a lot more morbid than it actually was. I mean, we weren't going to the cemetery at midnight and digging graves and performing satanic rituals or anything strange like that. It was, I mean, yeah, I just spent when I wasn't at school and there was an opportunity to work on the weekend or on school holidays or something like that, I would go to the cemetery, help dig graves, clean up rubbish, just do whatever I could do to earn a little bit of money. And that was actually how I bought my first Gibson guitar when I was a kid. So yeah, well worth it. The first rock concert that I went to and spent my own money on a ticket was an Australian band called Grinspoon. This probably would have been nearly 20 years ago now. I don't know, I would have been, I think I would have been 12 or 13 at the time, so that makes it about 17 years ago. Yeah, they did an all-ages show at the Palace in St Kilda, and it was awesome fun. And I think, you know, that was definitely the first one that I spent my own money on, and it sort of opened the floodgates in terms of what I was prepared to spend my money on, which became concerts, CDs, saving up for guitars, everything music related.